I felt life draining from my body. My last breath was underwater, in the marble bathtub of a luxury hotel. The bubbles slowly rising were all that remained of me, of my voice, of my cries for help that no one heard. The person I loved most in the world, the man to whom I gave my heart and my dreams, was the one who held my head there, without blinking, until everything stopped, until the last drop of air escaped from my lungs. I know what you must be thinking. How can love turn into something so ugly? I wondered that too, in the last second of lucidity I had, looking at his face distorted by the water. But this isn't a story about the end. Believe me, it's about the beginning. Because what happened after my heart stopped beating, no one would believe it if I weren't here, now, to tell it. Before all this, my life was normal. So normal it was almost predictable. I worked as a marketing analyst at a company downtown. I woke up at 7, took the same crowded subway, had coffee at the same corner bakery. My apartment was small, but it was mine. I had plants by the window and a collection of books I dreamed of having time to read. I had friends, went out on weekends, posted smiling photos on social media. On the outside, the picture of happiness of a woman in her early 20s. But inside, you know that feeling that something's missing? A silent emptiness in your chest that neither the best playlist nor the most expensive wine could fill. I felt like a spectator of my own life, just following a script I didn't write. And then, Ricardo appeared. He didn't enter my life. He invaded it. He was like a hurricane. Intense. Charming. He looked at me as if I were the only person in the world. Other people saw a successful, magnetic guy. What they didn't know, what only I felt, was how he filled that emptiness of mine. Each I love you from him was a brick building a castle around me. A castle that, at the time, I called home. The first time I saw a crack in that castle was at a dinner with my friends. A silly joke. A childhood friend hugging me. I didn't see anything wrong with it, but I felt Ricardo's hand squeeze my thigh under the table, with a force that left me breathless. His smile didn't waver. No one noticed. But the look he gave me when no one was watching was cold. That night, in the car, he didn't yell. It was worse. He spoke quietly, with a scary calm, about how that friend of mine didn't respect me, about how I needed to value myself more. And I, blindly, believed that was caring. Gradually, I began to distance myself from my friends. I stopped posting photos alone. I changed the way I dressed. Each small change was a sacrifice I made at the altar of that love, thinking I was building something solid. My best friend, Bia, tried to warn me. I remember her face, worried, at a cafe. "Isabella, this isn't normal," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but to me it sounded like an accusation. I defended Ricardo tooth and nail. I said she didn't understand the depth of what we had. The truth is, I didn't understand either. I was addicted to his intensity. The bad moments were horrible, but the good moments were spectacular. They were surprise trips, expensive gifts, declarations of love that seemed straight out of a movie. He would break me into 1,000 pieces and then rebuild me, making me believe that only he knew how to fix me. I thought I was living a movie romance, a love so strong it was almost dangerous. Little did I know that the dangerous part was the only real part. And the trip to French Guiana, which he sold to me as the greatest proof of love in the world, would be the stage for the final act. But what happened even before we got on that plane was already a sign that everything was about to crumble. The trip began with a bad feeling, one of those that gives you a stab in the stomach, a chill down your spine. At the airport, while we waited in the check-in line, he asked for my phone. "Let me check something," he said, with that smile that disarmed anyone. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. I handed it over, without thinking twice. What did I have to hide? He was silent for a long minute, just scrolling on the screen. The airport was crowded, noisy, but between us, the silence was heavy, cutting. Then he clenched his jaw. "Who is this Marcos who liked your photo from 3 weeks ago?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, so no one around could hear. I felt my blood freeze. Marcos was a college classmate I hadn't seen in years. I didn't even know he followed me. I tried to explain, laughing nervously, but he just handed me back the phone and said, "Delete it. Now." And I deleted it. There, in the middle of hundreds of people, I felt completely alone and cornered. On the plane, he acted as if nothing had happened. He took my hand, kissed my fingers one by one. "Sorry, my love," he whispered, pressing his forehead against mine. "I'm just afraid of losing you. You're everything to me." And like a fool, I believed him. I nestled into his shoulder, smelling the expensive cologne he wore, and let the humming of the plane calm me. I chose to believe in that illusion of peace, because the alternative was too terrifying to face at 30,000 feet. But the truth is, even there, with my head on his shoulder, I wasn't at peace. I felt his stares every time the flight attendant spoke to me. A simple, "Would you like a glass of water?" was reason for his hand to squeeze mine a little tighter. I smiled at her, but inside, I was screaming. It was like being trapped in a glass cage. Everyone could see me, but no one could see the bars. What happened next was even worse. When we landed and went to get our bags, mine didn't appear on the carousel. A silly thing, it happens. But for Ricardo, it was a personal insult. "You never pay attention, Isabella. Always distracted. How can you be so useless?" He didn't yell. He spoke with cold contempt while I filled out the lost baggage form. The airline employee looked at me with pity. Today, I know she wasn't pitying my lost suitcase. She saw something in me, in my shrugging shoulders, in my downcast eyes, that I refused to see myself. We arrived at the luxury hotel, the scene of the crime I didn't yet know would happen. The room was stunning. A balcony overlooking the ocean, a giant bed with 1,000 thread-count sheets. He opened a bottle of champagne, saying it was to celebrate the beginning of our new life. He kissed me, and for a moment, I wanted to believe. I clung to that moment like a castaway clings to a piece of wood. That's when my phone, which I had left on the nightstand, vibrated. It was a message from Bia. Just 3 words. "Girl, everything okay?" Ricardo saw the screen light up before I did. He grabbed the device. His face transformed. The smile disappeared. His eyes darkened. He was no longer the man I loved. He was a predator. He read the message aloud, with a tone of scorn that tore me apart inside. "She's still trying to save you, isn't she? She thinks you need to be saved from me?" And then, he looked at me. That look wasn't anger. It was a look of decision, a look of finality. And it was there, before any scream, before any touch, that I knew I wouldn't leave that room alive. If you've ever had a premonition and ignored it, do you understand what I felt? Tell me here in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because how I came back and what I did after is a story you need to hear. He didn't say a word. He just dropped my phone on the plush carpet. The sound was muffled, almost a sigh. And then he started walking toward me, slowly. Each step of his was a hammer blow to my chest. The man I loved was no longer there. In his place was a stranger, with eyes completely empty of any emotion I recognized. They were 2 dark, cold wells. I wanted to scream, run, but my body was paralyzed. It was like a nightmare where you know the danger, but your feet are glued to the ground. When he reached me, his hand grabbed my arm. The force was brutal, instantaneous. I felt my bones crack under the pressure of his fingers. He lifted me from the bed as if I were a rag doll and began dragging me. Without a word. His silence was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. I looked at his face, searching for any trace of Ricardo, anything I could recognize. There was nothing, just a mask of cold determination. He pulled me across the room, my bare feet sliding on the cold marble of the bathroom. The bathtub was already full. Steam was rising, fogging the mirror. The hot water, which should have been an invitation to relaxation, suddenly seemed like a liquid grave. That's when I really started to fight. I struggled, scratched, tried to plant my feet on the ground, but he was much stronger. "Ricardo, please," was the only thing I managed to say, and my voice came out like a thread, a whisper that was lost in the sound of the water. He didn't respond. He just turned me with a violence that left me breathless and pushed my head into the water. The shock was immediate. Hot water invading my nose, my ears. The world became a blue-green blur, and the only sound was a muffled, desperate pulsing inside my head. My arms flailed uncontrollably, looking for something to grab onto, but only found the smooth surface of the bathtub. The pressure of his hands on my neck was relentless. I felt my lungs burning, begging for air, a stabbing pain that spread throughout my body. I was drowning, and the last thing I saw, looking up, was his face, distorted by the water, watching me die without blinking. In that last minute, my life didn't flash before my eyes like in the movies. What came was a single thought, clear and cutting like broken glass. How did love turn into this? I didn't think about the pain. I didn't think about death. I thought about how I allowed such a beautiful feeling to transform into that monstrosity. I remembered Bia's worried face, my own reflection in the mirror, increasingly faded, and I felt a regret so deep, so overwhelming, that it hurt more than the lack of air. And then, the struggle ended. My muscles relaxed. The burning in my lungs gave way to a strange calm. One last bubble of air escaped from my lips, slowly rising toward the surface. It was my last breath, my last unspoken word. Darkness began to take the edges of my vision, closing like a curtain. The pulsing sound in my head disappeared. Everything became quiet. And then, silence. Absolute silence. The end. But the silence didn't last. Or rather, the silence of the world ended. But a new kind of silence began inside me. It wasn't emptiness. It was fullness. A calm I had never felt before. Suddenly, I was no longer struggling. I was no longer in pain. I was floating. The sensation was subtle at first. A light pull upward, as if I were a helium balloon accidentally released. I opened my eyes, but they were no longer my physical eyes. I saw the white ceiling of the bathroom, the condensation drops running down the wall, but from an impossible angle. I was hovering near the ceiling, looking down, and that's when I saw myself, my body, motionless, submerged in water that was beginning to cool. My long hair floated around my pale face, like dark algae. My arms floated loosely beside my body. It was a terribly peaceful scene, a broken doll left in the water. And beside the bathtub, standing, was Ricardo. He wasn't crying. He wasn't desperate. He was just standing there, his wet hands hanging at his sides, his chest rising and falling with heavy breathing. He looked at what he had done, and on his face there was no remorse. There was relief. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shake him, ask him why. But I had no voice. I had no hands. I was just consciousness, a spectator of my own tragedy. And as I watched him, the world around me began to change. The walls of the luxurious bathroom began to lose color, to become translucent. The sound of his breathing became distant, like an echo from a place I no longer belonged to. The hotel room, French Guiana, my entire life. Everything began to unravel at the edges, like an old photograph dissolving. That's when I felt it. Something else. A different pull, stronger. It wasn't upward or downward. It was forward. In the middle of the darkness that was beginning to swallow the scene of my murder, a point of light appeared. It was small, the size of a pinhead, but it shone with an intensity that didn't hurt the eyes. On the contrary, it was welcoming. And from that light emanated a feeling, a promise, of peace, of understanding, of a place where the pain of what I had just lived through didn't exist. All the fear I felt, all the anger, all the sadness, began to dissolve, washed away by that warmth that didn't burn. I looked one last time at the empty shell floating in the bathtub and at the monster watching it. I no longer felt anything for them. They were part of a story that had ended. My new story was beginning, there, in that point of light. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that's where I needed to go. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I felt that I was, finally, going home. Crossing that point of light was like diving into an ocean of warmth. There was no longer the sensation of floating, nor the memory of my body. I was just me, pure consciousness. The environment around me had no walls, no floor, no ceiling. It was an infinity of golden light, pulsating, as if I were inside the heart of a star. There were colors I had never seen, colors that had no name on earth, and music that wasn't sound, but a vibration that ran through every fiber of my being, tuning my soul. It was peace in its purest form, a peace that wasn't the absence of noise, but the presence of everything. And at the center of everything, or rather everywhere at once, was the presence. It wasn't a bearded man. It wasn't a human figure. It was the very source of that light, of that love that enveloped me completely. It was a vast, ancient intelligence, and at the same time incredibly personal. And it spoke to me, not with words that enter through the ears, but with an understanding that bloomed directly in my mind, as if ideas were seeds planted in fertile soil. The first thing I knew, without anyone needing to say it, was, "You are home. You are safe." And all the pain, all the fear I carried, simply dissolved, washed away by this certainty. Then, my life was placed before me. Not like a movie, scene by scene. It was more like seeing an immense tapestry and being able to see all the threads at once. I saw the red and vibrant thread of my love for Ricardo, but I also saw the dark and tight knots of his fear, control, possession. I saw how those knots gradually strangled my own thread, which was colorful and bright, until it became opaque, almost gray. I understood, in that instant, that his darkness wasn't a reflection of some failure of mine. It was just his. And for the first time, I forgave myself for not seeing it before. The guilt, that weight I carried on my back, evaporated. That's when the presence transmitted the most important revelation to me, a truth that became the new beating of my heart. The suffering you endured wasn't love, my daughter. Love liberates, it doesn't imprison. That understanding hit me with the force of a wave, but a wave of clarity, not violence. Happiness has infinite forms, and none of them require you to diminish your light to fit into someone else's darkness. I saw, then, thousands of other threads, of other women, tangled in knots similar to mine, and I felt their pain as if it were my own. And then, the voice, the presence, the love, gave me a choice. It showed me a path ahead, an even brighter light, a place of final rest, a veil that, if I crossed it, I would never return. But it also showed me the way back. The dark, painful path back to the cold body in the bathtub. "Your story isn't over yet," the presence communicated, with infinite tenderness. Go back and tell them. Tell them they don't have to endure it. Tell them their happiness is sacred. Your testimony will be the key that frees others." I looked at the infinite peace ahead of me, and then I looked back, at the pain of the world I had left. And for the first time in my life, the choice was clear. I was no longer the Isabella who was afraid. I was a woman with a mission. The love I felt in that place wasn't something to keep. It was something to share. It was an armor of light. And with that armor, I chose to return. I chose pain, struggle, a second chance. I turned away from eternal peace and dove back into darkness, carrying with me a message that not even death could silence. Looking at that infinite peace was like looking at the end of a long and exhausting race. I had arrived. I had won. The temptation to simply dissolve into that light, to forget the pain, the name Ricardo, the sensation of water in my lungs, was almost irresistible. I deserved that rest. Every cell of my soul cried out for it, but the presence's message echoed in me, not as a command, but as a purpose. Your testimony will be the key that frees others. I saw again in my mind those thousands of threads of other women, tangled in knots of fear and false love, exactly as mine had been. And I felt a wave of something stronger than the desire for peace. I felt a responsibility, a sacred fury. The Isabella who died in the bathtub wanted to rest, but the soul that was bathed in that golden light wanted to fight. The love I felt there wasn't passive. It was a force, a weapon, and I couldn't keep it just for myself. I looked at the darkness of the path back, at the pain that awaited me, and made my choice. I wasn't going back as a victim. I was going back as a messenger. Diving back was the opposite of everything I had felt. If going to the light was liberation, coming back was like being sucked by a vacuum. Peace dissolved, replaced by a vertiginous and cold fall. It was like being squeezed back through a funnel, back into a shell that no longer seemed to be mine. Warmth gave way to a cold that came from the bones. Celestial music was replaced by a sharp and deafening buzz. I felt the weight of my limbs. The texture of my wet hair stuck to my face, the bitter taste of bathwater in my mouth. And then, the shock. A violent spasm, as if lightning had struck my chest. My lungs, previously inert, contracted in desperate agony for air. My body arched out of the water, and I spat. I spat water. I spat death. I spat silence. The first gulp of air tore through my throat, like glass shards, burning, hurting, but it was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, the sound of life. I coughed nonstop, trembling, thrown on the cold bathroom floor, every fiber of my body screaming with pain and relief. I was back. When my vision finally focused, the first thing I saw were his feet. Ricardo was paralyzed beside the bathtub. I slowly looked up, passing the expensive pants, the soaked linen shirt, until I reached his face. The sick relief I saw when I was on the other side had disappeared. In its place was something much more primitive. First, the purest disbelief, as if he were seeing a ghost. Then, when I stared at him, with water dripping down my face, what I saw in his eyes was fear, an abject and deep terror. The predator, for the first time, seemed like prey, and in that instant, I knew the game had turned forever. Have you ever felt that you received a second chance, even a small one, to do everything differently? Tell me here in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because what I did with this second chance and how Ricardo paid for what he did is the part of the story that will leave you breathless. The terror on Ricardo's face was the first thing I saw clearly in my new life. That man, who minutes before was a cold-eyed predator, now looked like a scared child who had seen a ghost. And, in a way, he had. His lips trembled, trying to form a word that wouldn't come out. I didn't feel fear of him. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. The power he thought he had over me, the power to give and take life, had crumbled to dust. I stood up slowly, supporting myself on the edge of the bathtub, water dripping from my body, creating a puddle on the marble floor. I said nothing. I just stared at him. And in that silence, he broke. With a guttural sound, a sob of panic, he turned and ran. He ran out of the bathroom, out of the room, out of my life. The sound of the room door slamming shut was the most liberating period I'd ever heard. I stood there, trembling with cold, but with a calm inside that didn't make sense. The world outside seemed distant. I heard screams in the hallway, hurried footsteps. Someone must have seen Ricardo running like that. The room door burst open and a housekeeper entered, her face a mask of horror seeing me there, soaked and standing in the middle of the bathroom. The rest is a blur of voices in French, paramedics wrapping me in rough blankets, siren lights flashing through the window. Throughout the entire trip to the hospital, I didn't say a word. I just looked at my hands, seeing how they seemed both mine and someone else's at the same time. I was in a body that had died, and that was the strangest and most miraculous thing in the world. At the hospital, doctors looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They talked about hypothermia, post-traumatic shock, near drowning. They didn't have a category for resurrection. While they measured my blood pressure and drew my blood, I heard their words as if they were about someone else. I knew what had happened. I was there. I saw the light. I received the message. How could I explain this to a man in a white coat with a clipboard in his hand? So I stayed quiet. I let them call me lucky. Little did they know that luck had nothing to do with it. That was purpose. The first person from my family to arrive was Bia. She got the first flight as soon as she found out. When she entered my hospital room, her face was swollen from crying so much. She ran to hug me, and her hug was a hug of someone saying goodbye, of someone who almost lost. But when she pulled away and looked into my eyes, her expression changed from relief to confusion. She expected to find me in pieces, destroyed, and indeed the old Isabella was. But the woman looking back at her wasn't crying. My eyes were dry and calm. "I'm okay, Bia," I said, and my own voice sounded different to my ears. Firmer. "Really, it's over." She didn't understand. How could she? Returning to my apartment, days later, was the most surreal experience of all. The place was the same. My plants by the window, my books on the shelf, the familiar smell of my coffee. Everything was exactly as I left it. But I wasn't the same. I walked through the rooms like a visitor. Touching my own objects was strange. The world seemed sharper. Colors were more vibrant. Sounds were clearer. Each breath was a conscious gift. That emptiness I felt in my chest, the one Ricardo had filled with a dangerous illusion, had disappeared. In its place, there was fullness, a certainty that came from within, a light that was mine alone. I looked at myself in my bedroom mirror. The face was mine, but the look belonged to someone else. There was no more fear there, no more need to please, to diminish myself to fit into someone's world. The woman in the mirror wasn't a victim who survived. She was a messenger who had returned. The police were looking for Ricardo, who had disappeared like a ghost. My parents wanted me to get therapy for the trauma. Everyone treated me like a crystal vase that had cracked and been glued back together. What they didn't know is that I didn't crack. I was remade. And the mission I was given from the other side was just beginning. Have you ever gone through something that transformed you so deeply that you barely recognized yourself afterward? Tell me here in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Because how I used this new strength to ensure justice was served, and what happened when I finally came face to face with Ricardo again, is something you won't want to miss. Therapy was the first thing my parents insisted I do. I went. I sat on that soft leather couch, in front of a woman with a gentle look and a notepad, and waited for her to ask me the usual questions. "How do you feel? Do you have nightmares?" I answered honestly. I said I felt calm, that I slept through the night, a deep and dreamless sleep. I saw the confusion on her face. She expected tears, anger, paralyzing trauma. What she didn't understand is that the traumatized Isabella died in that bathtub. The woman sitting on her couch was someone else. Someone who had seen the other side of the curtain and returned with open eyes. I wasn't broken. I was whole for the first time in my life. The small things of daily life lost their power over me. Anxiety about a work deadline, worry about what others thought of me, the need for validation. All of it seemed so small, so insignificant. I walked down the street, and instead of sinking into my thoughts, I noticed the color of the tree leaves, the sound of a child's laughter, the warmth of the sun on my face. Every detail was a miracle. That emptiness I tried to fill with Ricardo's intensity had been filled, not by another person, but by myself, by the certainty that my life had intrinsic value, that didn't depend on anyone to be complete. I no longer needed someone to build a castle around me, because I discovered that I myself was the fortress. My relationship with the people I loved also changed. Bia, my best friend, tried to treat me like before. She called me to go out, to drink, to gossip about trivial things. And I went, I smiled, but she felt the difference. One day, sitting in our usual cafe, she held my hand and said with tears in her eyes, "I miss you." And I understood. She missed the insecure girl who needed her, the friend who shared the same anxieties. I hugged her and said, "That girl is gone, Bia. But the woman who's here loves you more than ever. It's just that now, I love myself too." It was the first time she saw strength in my eyes, not fragility. And gradually, she began to understand. My mission wasn't born from an elaborate plan. It was born from a moment. I was on the subway, going home, and I saw a teenage couple. He was holding her arm with a little more force than necessary, his jaw clenched while looking at her phone. And she had the same look I used to have, a forced smile, an almost imperceptible shrug. In that instant, I didn't see two teenagers. I saw my story repeating itself. I saw the tangled threads. And the message I received in that golden light echoed in my head with the force of thunder. Go back and tell them. I got off at the next station, my heart beating fast. Not with fear, but with purpose. I knew what I had to do. That same night, I picked up my phone, the same device that was the trigger for my death. I opened the camera, propped it on a stack of books, and pressed record. I looked at the small lens and didn't see a million strangers. I saw that girl on the subway. I saw Bia, worried. I saw myself, years younger, blinded by a love that was poison. And I began to speak. I told everything, without filters, without shame. I told about the drowning, about the light, about the choice. Each word was a liberation. Each sentence was a brick in building my new purpose. I was no longer just surviving my story. I was using it as a weapon to break other chains. Do you believe that a near-death experience can really change the essence of a person? Or is it just trauma speaking louder? Leave your opinion here in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Because the video I posted that night went viral in a way I never imagined, and the world's reaction, and Ricardo's own, who was hiding in the shadows, started a hunt that no one expected. I had to die to learn how to live. I had to reach the end to understand that my value wasn't in the intensity of someone else's love, but in the silent strength of my own soul. The message I brought back isn't about religion. It isn't about what exists after. It's about what exists now. It's about the right each of us has to be happy, to be free, to breathe without fear. If you're in a relationship that erases you, that diminishes you, that makes you question your own worth, this message is for you. Love shouldn't hurt. Happiness isn't a reward you earn after enduring suffering. Happiness is your natural state. It's the air you deserve to breathe every day. There are infinite ways to be happy, and you don't need anyone's permission to find yours. Your life is too precious to be the last breath in someone else's story. Choose, today, to be the first breath of your own story. Have you ever felt that life gave you a second chance, even a small one, to rewrite your own story? Tell me here in the comments. I really want to know. This is my mission now, and it's just beginning. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because I'm going to share other stories like mine, of people who found their own voice in the darkest situations. You won't want to miss it.